welcome to Big Tent. My name is Kitty Douglas, and I am the president of Big Tent USA. We are steadfast in our commitment to defending our democratic values, the Constitution, and the rule of law. Our goal is to empower you with facts, guidance, and calls to action so you can become a stronger, more effective advocate for the country we all love. Tonight, we are so honored to welcome two exceptional women to Big Tent. Daniela Blue Aris is founder and CEO of Leadership Now Project, a national membership organization of business and thought leaders committed to fixing American democracy. She began her career at Bain and Company and then became a founding partner at Dahlberg. Daniela later served 5 years in the Obama administration as senior advisor for development to the Secretary of State under Secretaries Clinton and Kerry. Her perspectives have appeared in the Harvard Business Review, the New York Times, Fast Company, Politico, and the World Economic Forum. Heidi Przybyla is an award-winning investigative and television correspondent, championing new approaches to reporting that put Americans first. A veteran journalist, she has regularly broken exclusive stories on how White House, congressional, and presidential policies affect everyday people, and she is very busy right now. Her reporting has spanned top newspaper, digital, radio, and TV outlets with appearances on every channel you can name: CNN, PBS, CBS, ABC, Fox, to name a few, and across NBC News platforms. In 2023, Przybyla founded Get Real News, a platform using new technologies and independent journalists to deliver reliable local and national news. Daniela and Heidi, thank you so much for coming to Big Tent USA. And Daniela, I will turn the call over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Kitty, and to the Big Tent team for bringing this event together. Thanks to everyone from across the country who's on the line. And I'm so thrilled to be here with Heidi Przybyla, who's an incredible leader, innovator, and I think more than just an observer of how our media landscape has evolved over the last decades and is doing some real work to change it. So I'm really excited to be here with you, Heidi, today, and for us to talk more about what's happening in the media landscape, and importantly, what all of us can do, what you're doing, and what we can all do. And I'm also very pleased to have a fellow Gen X leader and entrepreneur on the line.
You brought it up first. We discussed this. Daniela and I are kind of simpatico in terms of that generational pull that we both feel it's kind of on Gen X now to build something new and to lead. Her, in her case, on the business side, and in my case, on the journalism side. So yes, it was actually last fall, though, that I left my position at Politico to start building something new, because I felt like at this position in life, being mid-career, and I'm sure you feel the same, I had critical insights into what's gone wrong in our information ecosystem, how it happened, and enough runway left to try and do something about it.
Yeah, look, I think your years in journalism, you've seen kind of inside out how our media ecosystem was built, has evolved, and has now been disrupted in many ways. And, I think you shared with me that you'd really treated your analysis of the media ecosystem like you would do in other investigative journalism endeavors. So interested to hear, when you dove deep in that way, reflected back on the industry that you'd been a part of for so long, what did you learn, and what do you think it tells us about where we are today?
Yeah, Daniela, and the other piece that I wanted to mention first is in terms of my experience. It's not just my professional experience, it was also my life experience. Just briefly, because I think this will help you understand a little bit more about why I'm doing this. I grew up in a working class neighborhood in Detroit, just outside of Detroit, a few blocks from Detroit, actually. My father was a teamster who moved furniture. And I graduated high school right at the dawn of NAFTA. And I can still remember the anxieties back then. I'm telling you this because those kinds of communities are the places that the free press has now lost. And throughout my journey through the halls of big journalism institutions, covering the White House, Congress, campaigns, all that time, I was straddling two worlds, right? I would be coming home to the neighborhood in which I grew up, and that was becoming more decrepit, more poor. And all the time I'm watching this gulf grow between the people and the culture of my childhood and that of my professional world. So I often share that I feel like the door of opportunity for someone like me to rise throughout the ranks of whatever her vocation may be shut further behind me. To your question of diagnosing the pain points, yes, I saw a problem, frankly, 8 months before the election in a way that I felt it would be necessary to build a new institution. I really felt after so many years in big journalism that we were not going to innovate quickly or as efficiently or as significantly as we would need to meet this moment. And so I did call a brain trust of academics, social and behavioral scientists, and also journalist experts to think about what are the actual pain points that we need to be diagnosing at this time and how do we treat them. What I found, Daniela, was that a lot of people think that the problem started with the advent of social media. But the problem is so much deeper and infrastructural than that, and it is played out over about 30 years. So in 1980, most Americans got their news from one of three major TV networks and their local paper. And what you see on this slide here is that we have lost, just in the last 20 years, 3 of every 4 local journalists on average gone. As far as the networks, there's been a dramatic decline in viewership there too. From 2011 to 2016, about a 50% drop on average in network news viewership. This is an infrastructural crisis, right? Our founders conceived us, the free press, as a public good, but it's always been run like a business, a commodity, not an actual right to good information. And that worked for a long time. But now the tracks of the digital revolution were laid right over us, right? Technology companies gobbling up our ad revenue, journalism not innovating. I often say we lost our business model, we lost our ad dollars. You can see here we're losing our journalists, and now we're losing our independence. To me, given the incredible stakes of maintaining a free press, how could we have let this happen? How could we have not innovated? Well, we are now living through what it looks like when those gatekeepers are replaced by a circus tent of activism, pseudo journalists, and even anti journalists. People ask me, why'd you leave? My quick answer is, I got tired of competing for audience with somebody named Cat Turd on Twitter. And I'm not even kidding. He had a bigger Twitter handle than a lot of the journalists in my news organization. Slide number 2, just briefly, because this will put the whole puzzle together for you. This is exploring what happens when the journalists leave. You may think that this is a political map, but it's not. These are the places that are called news deserts. That means they are places where there's no news, in the case of the orange, or only one news outlet, one news source left in the case of the light aqua. What's happened is that into those same places have come hyper-partisan national sources, talk radios, and something called pink slime. You may know that as that pink fluorescent meat paste filler, but it also refers to hyper-partisan activist networks masquerading as trusted local news sources. And the largest is Metric Media. What they do is they create these low-cost automated sites with fake bylines and quotes. And there are now more of these pink slime websites than there are actual local newspapers. In 2024, just before the election, there was this group of purported Catholic newspapers that began circulating in swing states ahead of the presidential election. And they were targeting Catholic voters on key issues. They were tailored just like that, just like the pink slime, tailored for each state with a uniform design, but like a hyper local specific name. ProPublica linked it to Metric Media. So now they've expanded into actual print assets. So this is why just buying up networks doesn't work. It's why just creating equal and opposite cores of social media influencers doesn't work. There was a profound infrastructural capture that took place over the last 30 years. And I haven't even gotten into the talk radio and television network ownerships.
Wow, it's pretty stunning. And I think that data is if one needs a call to action on the current state of affairs, I think it really does that. It's interesting, the Catholic Church one is a reflection we saw in our members in Arizona, that there was a Catholic voter guide in wide circulation that I wonder if it was tied to that media, but it's clear that it was being used as a way to define what a Catholic voter and who a Catholic voter should vote for, and included Trump at the top of the ticket, among others. So you've kind of laid down a pretty disturbing picture of the landscape and the problem. And so let's shift to what do we do about it, and where is there a path out of the entire country basically being a news desert?
The good thing is that I feel like a lot of people are starting to understand this, which is another reason why I left, because I thought, okay, now everybody else can see it too. We need to collectively fund media. This culture of treating good information like a commodity that only certain people have access to is not keeping an enlightened public. I want you to see just how underinvested we are in media that serves all Americans compared to healthier democracies. So as you can see at the far end, you have countries like the UK, Finland, Norway, a lot of them the Nordic countries. This is a percentage of our GDP that we invest in media. And look, this worked for us for a long time, right? But it's not working now. And my concern is that people are collectively funding media in terms of Substacks and independent journalists who are leaving, and thank you very much. My concern is the paywalls, right? And that the paywalls are making the fragmentation even worse. We're having the fundamental problem here is where people who need this information the most don't have access to it for many reasons. And the paywalls are my big concern. So what I'm trying to do is to create a system where we look to where the puck is headed, right? We look to where audiences are going. All of these formats now where people get their information, and this includes digital, it includes radio, it includes certainly linear television, are in decline, and they're in dramatic decline. That sounds like bad news, but I don't think it is, because to me, that's a leveling opportunity. That's an opportunity for civil society to say, if we find good collective ways to support media and to innovate, then we're all on an equal playing field. And it's who's going to innovate and take advantage of these new tools in terms of specifically using machine learning and AI ethically, and then using what we know works. All right. And what we know works are trusted local voices. When you look at the numbers, I mean, our popularity ratings couldn't be lower as like a national news industry, but people trust their trusted local news. They trust their trusted local journalists, and they also trust creators. A lot of people in my industry are having a very hard time right now with the creator economy, taking the content and doing much better with repurposing our content, right? But I think there's a way that we can work together with them, with the standards of legacy journalism, but with the energy and excitement and platforms of how people are consuming their information in our modern society. And frankly, I don't think we have a choice. We have to innovate, and we have to find a way to do it collectively.
So it's a pretty big task. And I think before we get into what you're starting to do about it, which I think is exciting, and building a new model, I think a lot of people are uh, likely feeling really concerned about how the administration is pushing back on free speech. Like, is it even possible, to have a free media right now? We can innovate all we want, but when Jimmy Kimmel, for instance, is pulled off the air when he says something that's unfriendly um, to the administration, what is that? What does it take to actually change that dynamic? I think in that case, the outcome perhaps gives us some direction of what can be done. But how do you think about those two things going on? The media uh, just being hollowed out in many ways, and the push to control speech, or um, to exact retribution on those who are putting other ideas out there.
We all see what's happening, right? And a lot of it is due to the consolidation in a few hands of our mediums, of our forums. We have the richest man in the world who owns X. The second richest owns Paramount, CBS, and now possibly TikTok and CNN. Jeff Bezos owns The Post and Twitch, and then Mark Zuckerberg owns Facebook and Instagram. A lot of those folks were standing behind Trump at his inauguration, and a lot of them are beholden to the administration for business deals that they want, right? Mergers, acquisitions. That's obviously a problem, because what we're seeing is that they are susceptible to this combination of legal warfare and regulatory levers to punish and squeeze them. And they'd rather pay out large sums of money than to try to beat these cases in court. Additional news organizations are now being sued. However, there is a light here, and a good story that came out of the entire Kimmel situation. And that is that this highlights, again, the story of the power of collective action. In this case, the power of the consumer. It was consumers who began to immediately cancel their subscriptions to Disney Plus and Hulu shortly after his suspension was announced. I believe Disney stock dipped and traded lower in the subsequent days. Consumers were upset. And even after Disney reinstated him, there were two local TV giants, affiliates, that said, no, we're going to preempt it. And they were praised by the FCC commissioner. But then again, the consumer came in, and boycott lists were circulating on places like Reddit and Facebook. And both of those companies wound up folding with, I don't think, anything obvious to show for it. That is the takeaway. And again, if I go back to what I've seen out on the campaign trail, in the halls of Congress, is that people are picked off when they allow themselves to be isolated. And I mean politicians, media, big academic institutions, all of us, but we're much stronger when we work collectively.
Yeah, the collective action problem is kind of at the heart of where we are right now, right? And media is no different in that regard. And I agree. I think the Kimmel example is a very clear one, and also one that not only had consumers but conservative free speech advocates pushing back, and even someone like Senator Ted Cruz. So let's get into, before we go into questions, let's hear more about the model you're building. We have a profound problem, and it always takes someone to just start building the alternative to define what can work. So share a bit more.
Yeah. So after we diagnose the pain points, which are trust in the national media, information being bottlenecked, the information being stuffed into the same silos effectively, the silos probably where you, I, and a lot of people on this call dwell, because we can afford the paywalls and we watch the same shows. So the proposition was, very simple, how do we get good information back to the people who need it the most? How do we leverage this moment of technological innovation and combine it with what we know works, which is trusted local voices? Well, a lot of these micro and nano creators, whether they be independent journalist creators or actual creators, they have very loyal followings and they have very high trust. So we've been experimenting with them. We've been doing pilots of what would it look like if we got good information out through these creators in a way that there is journalistic oversight and there is good information, but with their own creative flair. And we know that they are reaching underserved audiences by definition because they are out there on other days talking about lipstick or talking about fried chicken, right? So their audiences are the underengaged people that we want to reach. And we've been really thrilled with the response that we're getting and all of the creators who want to work with us and who are putting out good content using our new kind of creator desk model. And then the technology stack that we're building, which is designed to empower both creators, independent journalists, and newsrooms to get good information, but at a much lower cost. Because, Daniela, those journalists that I showed you have disappeared since the last 20 years are not coming back. They're not coming back because we don't have a revenue innovation to bring them back. And so the best thing that we can do right now is to support the journalists who are still on the front lines with the best possible technology and resources, and then to use trusted local voices to work with us, right? Because they're already using our content, to find a way to harness that and then eventually also innovate on the revenue side.
So you're really redefining kind of the job description of a local journalist.
We're going to use the technology in ways that I find really exciting, yes, because we're also redefining how we interact with communities. Like, one thing we've learned is that a lot of these communities that need to be reached, and that's what distinguishes us from a lot of the other projects out there, is we're going into new audiences that need to be reached with this information. And we have this incredible opportunity before us actually right now to go into Pennsylvania and some other markets to partner with some of the most trusted names in news and local newspapers to repackage that content, to get it into the system, right? Get it to the people who need it. It'll be fed in a different way. It'll look different. It'll be a different voice delivering it. But getting the information into these silos is nevertheless the effect. It is what we're accomplishing. So we're also focusing primarily on the things that impact all Americans, because again, we want this to be something that is unifying. And I find when I look at some of our comments, for instance, there's folks that maybe on other pages might be considered a troll, but if you talk to them about things that impact them, like, hey, that's your Medicare, or let's talk about the prices at your grocery store, they don't view that as political. They view that just as good information and they respond to it. Well, yeah, I don't like that. Or there's more of a dialogue and you're not pushing down information on them. You're using these tools like social listening to listen, okay, what do they care about? And then giving them good information on that.
Well, that's encouraging. And it sounds like you're already starting in multiple
Yes.
places in Pennsylvania and other states and creating like a new kind of journalistic team, it sounds like, paired with technology to reach all the people who are sitting in news deserts. Last thing, and then I want to open up for questions. How do you think about success? You know, what's success look like as we look 1 to 5 years ahead?
For my project success, or just for democracy? Okay.
Yeah. Well, for democracy, there's lots of things, but
Kind of,
as you think about building up your effort.
if we can get back into communities that do not have access to good information and bring them back to the table in critical states, I think that is a huge accomplishment for our democracy and for civil society. And as you saw from my slides, I do believe, Daniela, that this is the underlying illness in our democracy right now. And just if you agree with me, right, that our democracy, our republic is kind of like an ill patient. Ill patients get better when they get a good diagnosis, when you finally figure out what is the thing that's making them ill, and then you treat that. And the underlying infrastructure in our system and the loss of trust are the things that we're solving for. And those are the things, again, that I strongly believe are the underlying condition. And I think the data proves it out, that you can see the decline in trust in democracy, the hyperpolarization. It is all run almost perfectly in line with the decline in news, in local news, and the way that we consume our news.
Yeah, and it goes along with the populist playbook in many ways, right? You want to destroy trust in the system and in media, and then consolidate it, and that's what we're
Validate it and have your allies buy it up.
yeah.
Yep.
So that is what we're all working against, and I think I take a lot of hope by having leaders like you come into this space and drive
Well,
a
you
different
too.
change.
Well, I should ask you, like, how do you think business leaders are doing right now? I know the group that you formed was started by women business leaders. So I know we're going to go to questions, but how do you see business leaders responding right now?
Yeah, I think business is far from a monolith, first of all. And so when you talk about, for instance, those who are buying up media right now, or, whether it's the Elon Musk of the world or the tech leaders, et cetera, who have made, a deal or various deals with this administration, have really been okay with undercutting, I think, a lot of norms in the political system. I think on the flip side, there are many leaders across business, there are many executives, and I see it with women in particular, but women and men who believe in a system that works and know the rule of law is critical to a fair system, who know that crony capitalism is a very bad path, which is very much the direction we're going. And so even though I think there is a real fear and concern about the directions things are going, and also the economic impacts like tariffs and threatening the Fed, et cetera, I am seeing really deliberate engagement and organizing. And that could be, supporting Mikey Sherrill and Abigail Spanberger, who are running for, governor in the only governor's races next month, who are really critical. Or it can be our members in Wisconsin who have been very vocal about the importance of addressing gerrymandering in the state, the risk of tariffs to critical industries, and have not been afraid to come out there and be vocal as a bipartisan group, but that would stand against election deniers, would stand for kind of rule on our economy. So we definitely need a lot more, both from business and every other sector, in terms of addressing the collective action risk. But I've seen, particularly in the last few months, that there is both a real concern with where we are. We're just updating our latest polling of business executives on where they see the state of the economy and politics. We last did in April. 84% were concerned or very concerned across political parties. So I think there's a lot of latent concern. I think there's activity happening in different areas, but I also think we are seeing in the kind of brand name leaders in business, of which there's a limited number. I mean, from my perspective, not to critique the press, Heidi, but there's like
Feel free.
20 brand name business leaders that they only report on. None of them are women from, I think, there's just an incredible, set of people across this country who are seeing kind of locally what's important, how this is impacting their business, and how a better future for this country is possible. That's not chaotic, that's not undermining norms all the time, et cetera. So I think there is hope in that. And, the thing that I would just say, because I've reflected on it, I think about what do you actually do in this context? And this is so inherent with what BigTent is doing, right? Is we have to be informed with the kind of valid facts and information about what's going on. And even for those of us who are reading behind the paywalls, it is hard to parse what's happening and what it really means. So I think leadership now, like BigTent, are really working to make sure our members are well informed about what's happening, what it means, and then be ambassadors to all of our peers around the country, to have a clear understanding of the problem and paths to action. So with that, I'm going to send it over to Kitty to take questions from those on the line.
Thank you so much, Daniela and Heidi, for that great conversation. I appreciate you both letting each other sort of lay the groundwork about what you're doing and why you're doing the work that you are, and why you've pivoted in your careers to do this really important work at this time. So I think that that is incredibly important. So there are some great questions. So I'm just going to start with them. Joe Kurtz wants to know, Sinclair, you've got Nexstar, is that it? You know, this consolidation going on. We now have, as you mentioned, Larry Ellison might buy TikTok. He already owns Paramount and CNN. So there's a lot of concern in the chat around how can independent media survive when you have this massive consolidation? And you have addressed it, Heidi, but from both of your point of views, like when you have this kind of consolidation, like what do smaller outlets need to do in order to sort of like get over that hurdle?
Well, it's so massive, the imbalance, the infrastructural imbalance. And you're right, I did not get into Salem and Sinclair. However, Sinclair is the largest owner of local television stations, and they often platform people with a particular political perspective in the evenings, especially. And this is a huge part of the diagnosis of the 30-year evolution to how we got here. Let me just give you an example. If you are driving, for instance, through Middle America, you're driving through Missouri, the place where you get your trusted local information, like your weather, your traffic, the place you have to go to in order to get your life stuff, is also the place where later in the day, someone who says that they are a journalist comes on and gives you their opinions on the news of the day with a very political tilt to it. And it explains a lot, Kitty, because it's a method, right? That people were brought in over the decades with trusted local information and then fed additional information. When you ask, what can we do about it? Well, I will just point out that in other backsliding democracies, it has been when the liberal billionaires cede the field and when the business leaders cede the field and say, I'm just going to stay out of it. I'm going to raise my family. This politics is not for me. This isn't normal politics, right? And so finding a way to collectively support independent media, especially the investigative journalists, who I can tell you firsthand are really concerned right now. It's a really difficult field to be in. There's so few of us, so much less being invested in investigative journalism. And yet that's what we need to do, is support those collectives. I will tell you that the bright spot of the Salem Sinclair kind of question is that those formats are dying. They are going to go away. And it's the same thing with digital. There were huge declines in digital viewership, even for publications that got new subscriptions, like the actual traffic is down. That means, to go back to my earlier comments, that there's this window of opportunity that we have to walk through together to innovate. And it is the folks who finance that, support that, and the journalists who are willing to also walk through that door that need to link hands and to come up with those new innovations. And not to keep coming back to my particular solution, but I see this combination where technology makes us more efficient. It doesn't replace us. It makes us more efficient as reporters to give you that news you can use, the hyper-local information that you need for your life, to bring people back, and then to give them good content, to give them content that makes our communities healthy again, and to serve it to them using new voices because we do have such a trust deficit. I am not going to sugarcoat the situation with right now that the infrastructure ownership, because it's all of these additional platforms, right? Like Rumble, X, we didn't even get into any of that. So yes, we're up against this massive challenge, but I choose to view this as a window of opportunity and a leveling moment because they're losing audience and fast. I mean, the networks, like I said, went down like 50%, and that's across the board. It's not ideological, it's a business shift.
Daniela, have you, as leadership now, tried to engage any media companies, any leaders? Is there anyone sort of showing up on behalf of democracy that you could identify for us and maybe give us a little bit of hope here?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think as Heidi said, the tricky thing is having engaged with various parts of the ecosystem, whether it's publications, the cable networks, et cetera. Those models are really, many of them, and the legacy ones are in decline. So I think where we have seen the most promise is those who are building through social media, through reaching influencers and others, creative models to do that, and also new publications. I think to Heidi's point on the paywalls, I don't know exactly how you build out those models without them fully, but I do think you are seeing some innovation behind the paywalls that ideally could now come out from there, right? Like that has created, whether it's through Substack or through various other mediums. So, you know, I can't say I have the, like there's a leader in the media space that's a legacy player that's driving that transformation in a really compelling way. But I think the entrepreneurs like Heidi that I'm seeing are pretty dynamic and robust, and where we need to double down.
So a double thank you to Heidi then for doing what you're doing with Get Real News. We got a great question about protests and organizing, since you both referenced the response to Bob Iger's decision to take Jimmy Kimmel off the air, and then his rapid reinstatement of Jimmy Kimmel, given the money that he was about to lose and that Disney was about to lose. So Chance Lourdes wants to ask, is asking, like, what do you think of like the protest organizing of like shutting down work for a day, like not going to the office or not spending, you know, one day a month, those kinds of things, especially given that some people might not want to take to the streets, given that we're in a police state in some states, or no social media, any sort of other ways of protesting what the Trump administration is doing that you think could be a driver of change in either media or business? I'll let you go first, Daniela.
Well, in the time I spend with kind of advocacy groups and those who are way better at this than I think we are, right? They're the groups that focus on how do you get kind of more mass mobilization. I will say that I think the organizing, for instance, between behind the No Kings March has been very smart, right? In terms of both the messaging, the approach, et cetera. And I think the Kimmel one was such a success because it was so organic in many ways. So I think the trick is, and I will leave it to those who do the kind of broader organizing to make those calls, but the decision to do something like people not going to work for a day or boycotts or others, you kind of have to do it when the momentum is organically there. And I think part of the reason some of those things haven't been called for is an assessment that like there's momentum, but it's not at a tipping point for some of those things. So like the No Kings March are kind of deliberately something to build momentum, to get people comfortable with being out there, et cetera. I think the Kimmel example gives another one. So that's not a perfect answer, but I think it is something where you kind of can't get fully ahead of sentiment on these, on doing that. And I think sentiment is shifting, but I don't think there's been an assessment that it's as widespread as it needs to be yet, but it's building.
Heidi, what do you think?
I I don't, as a journalist, I've only covered protests as an observer. I will say that from a journalism standpoint, I was heartened by what happened today with the media really standing firm on this new Pentagon policy that they tried to force news organizations to say that they were only going to publish materials that have been approved by the Pentagon, even stuff that's not classified. For the first time since 1943, now we're not going to have a major news outlet in the Pentagon because all of the news organizations said no, and they locked arms and they're walking out. That is what I think needs to happen. And it's frankly something I've felt for several years, that a lot of these briefings are just not worth the quantity of reporters that we have there covering them, not getting good answers. And I'm sorry, in many cases, it goes for a lot of administrations where we just sit in that briefing room and kind of it's made for TV. It's not where we should be, given how overextended we all are and the public service that is needed right now of really meaty investigative journalism. So I think this is an interesting test to see, do we actually, as an industry, lose out that much from not physically being there? And will news organizations redeploy their journalists to doing the kind of accountability, more of the accountability journalism that I think is needed at this moment?
Well, thank you for that, because you answered Sally Hyman's question. So she wanted to know what you thought of that. Agreed. It was about time that they linked arms and took a stand. So that's something. Um, Love to get into the social media giants and their control over the information that we receive on social media. As we know, trust in journalists, well, trust in media outlets is so low. Trust in um, content creators is much higher, as you point out, Heidi. But social media platforms, algorithms, and the men who control them is just massive. And that is such a hard thing to unpack. So I'd love to have you guys just pretend and imagine, you have control of legislation to literally change the social media platforms and the algorithms. Daniela, as a business person, and Heidi, as a journalist, what would you do to sort of right the ship on the amount of power that social media platforms have over our lives?
Look, I spent many years on Capitol Hill, and I think a big part of the problem was, frankly, that the lawmakers didn't understand the platforms, not in the slightest. And so then to ask them to also regulate them was really asking a lot. And now, given the zero-sum kind of nature of our politics and the control of the chambers, I don't see it happening, but you're asking in an ideal world. In an ideal world, there would be a new platform, and that platform would turn the power back to the people to determine what kind of content they want to be seeing, instead of the algorithm deciding it for them. And the algorithm, as you know, being driven by sensationalism, outrage, um, things that are not even true. I'm very concerned about AI now getting into the mix, which is frankly part of why we're calling what we're doing Get Real, because we want people to know when they come to our content, we will have real people and real information that's locked down. And I think that is going to be a huge public need in the future. I know there are folks who wanted to purchase TikTok, for instance, and do something different with it. Now it sounds like Barron Trump is going to have potentially a higher position within TikTok if that goes through. So I don't have a lot of kind of optimism right now that that algorithm addiction is going to change anytime soon, and the whole push to grab people's attention within the first 3 seconds. This is like terrifying to us as journalists, right? Because our entire job is providing context. I do think if there is a world where we can get people out of this algorithm addiction and return the power to them to choose what kind of content they want to see, that would go a long ways, but I don't see how we're getting there currently.
I'll give a little bit more hope on that, which is I think where you're seeing action from a regulatory perspective is at the state level, right? So California just last week did pass a slate of bills related to privacy, to the usage by young people, et cetera. We're still unpacking. It just happened. So there was a whole slate of bills. We're still analyzing the impact. Some of our members were very engaged there. And I think that there's promise in creating state level regulatory regimes, and California obviously being very significant. A Republican state like Utah is also doing things. The Secretary of Commerce there is a great leader on really looking at how do they approach content that's towards young people and create an approach to privacy that's also consistent with kind of conservative values, thinking about free speech, et cetera. So I think the states you're seeing, the attorney generals across many states are looking at this. So I think that's where you're going to have to see action from a regulatory perspective and some replication to address both the privacy issues and the algorithmic issues. It's not going to address all of it. I mean, it's just not possible. There's also just norms change in the way people are taking information and the ability to control your algorithm. That's obviously key. But I think from a federal level, we're not going to see anything, but I'm not without hope at a state level.
Let's sort of dive into that state level conversation. Our last couple minutes, we've had a couple comments about how, learning about sort of more local news sources, state news sources, like the newsrooms of Courier, Des Moines Register, and other organizations. Maybe unsubscribing from your national feeds and starting to support some of the more local news organizations could be a good thing for everyone to do. So Heidi, any other recommendations for us on this call? Yeah, great.
Absolutely support your local news where it exists, because those are laboratories of change as well. We're not going to solve this problem of coming up with a new revenue model without kind of crowdsourcing what's working, again, to Daniela's point, at the state level. And there is a huge push right now, an initiative called Press Forward, which is a consortium of big foundations putting a lot of money into reviving local news, but not in old formats, like in digital formats. And there are a bunch of exciting local nonprofit news sources that are springing up. So if you have one in your area, say a note of thanks and support them as best you can, whether it's advertising or subscription. That's the way to go right now.
Yeah, Daniela, what about you?
I would just add, I mean, in terms of, and this is unrealistic to have completely across the board, but I think getting your news directly from sources rather than through social media, like choosing your news sources and going direct to those sites, to those apps, et cetera, I do think is, something that really transforms your experience of the news. So I still advocate for that. In addition to, I completely agree with Heidi that investing and supporting those local sources and using them is really critical.
And I would love to get you back to BigTent, Daniela, in early 2026, because I know you have a lot of support in Wisconsin, and that's going to be a major focus in 2026, the Supreme Court race. So we'll have to get you back to talk about that. It's a big deal. So
I'll say just one thing on that.
Yeah, please do.
Redistricting is in the courts right now. Our members have been very visible on supporting objective redistricting in the state, and we're a party to the case that is just going in front of the Supreme Court to get the lines drawn in an objective way, which would make the state much more balanced across Democrats and Republicans versus what happens right now. So, and that has been the product of, engagement in multiple Supreme Court races, in, changing the public narrative and working with many actors. Many actors have kind of worked to change that dynamic. So yes, look forward to that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, both of you have mentioned this, and I think everyone on this call, we all need to remind ourselves that we didn't get ourselves in this mess overnight, and we're not going to get ourselves out of this overnight. And so to have both of you thinking about what we need right now, what we need long term is just really gives us all a lot of hope on this call. So thank you for that. Okay, we got to get to Colleen's question because it's really important and it's a good one for those of us who are not following creators. But how do you find your creators, Heidi, and how do you engage them and train them and keep working with them?
What we're envisioning is recreating the same good content that one would get in a newspaper, but in video format. So you think about creators, there's different categories. There are journalists who are journalist creators, and we are working with some of the most active consortiums that are trying to support creator journalists. So if you go to our channels, you'll see journalists who've recently left Legacy News, who are independent journalists, and we are supporting them. And that's primarily just with support, like creative support, editing videos, giving them good video content with our social media team. And then there is this whole other category, which I would liken to kind of like a modern op-ed opportunity, right? With creators who are giving their POV, their points of view on whatever the issues are. As long as they're transparently marked, I think that's a good thing because we're not viewing them with hostility, but we're welcoming them in the conversation while respecting that this is a journalist who's been trained and gone to school and is a career journalist, and this is a creator giving their POV and working with good information. So obvious how we pick our creator journalists, right? Independent journalists who are leaving big news organizations and coming to us for support. The creators, we do it a few ways, right? Like we go onto social media, we look at their history, the things that they've posted on, we interview them because we want to know that the issues are that they're talking about are things that they care about, because we don't want to do anything that's not authentic. So the really fascinating thing that we've learned is when you start talking to some of these creators who maybe, I don't know, looking at, talking about fried chicken or makeup, is that's because that's who people are paying them to talk about. You ask them what they care about, and they care about the environment. They care about women's health. And we've had a few of them do videos for us. One of them was like this bodybuilder who I think is probably a little more conservative. And he said to me, well, I love the Great Lakes. I don't want to see the EPA slashed, and therefore that is not political. And I want to do a video on it. Great. So again, when you're talking to people about things that they care about, they don't view that as political, and they want to engage on things that they care about. But you do have to vet them, make sure there's no kind of bad online behavior. And we also have model contracts that have been created based on the American Press Institute's model contracts that they drew up as part of a pilot program that they did with creators. Thanks, Colleen. That's my sister.
Oh, sister. Okay. Thanks, Colleen. Great question. We're out of time. And so this has been an incredible hour with both of you. We've had a lot of great feedback, and we just thank you both so much for the work you're doing and for remaining hopeful and giving us all hope. So Heidi, Daniela, thanks for coming to Big Tent. We'll see you all soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.